Hey guys, how are you today? It's Friday, April the 3rd. It's 6 p.m. And as I've promised for all the lovely people in my group, today I'm going to continue with the training in the whole series of how to stay sane during the crisis and how to actually enhance and deepen your connection with your partner in these times of close quarters, quarantine, self isolation and whatever working from home arrangements have you got. Last week on Friday, I did a course, a little training on how to communicate better with your partner. And because many of you have shared with me that this is one of the biggest issues that you are facing today, I just wanted to continue this series and come up with another technique or an additional strategy that you can use in enhancing this communication and your connection with your partner. So last week I was talking about the communication map. Today I have a completely, or not completely, but mostly different. Hi. I can see you all coming online, so thank you for being there and sharing this with me. All right, so I'm going to start straight away with this particular training where what is really going to happen is that we're going to talk a lot about how to communicate better with your partner, because I know everyone is feeling right now that once we get out of this quarantine, wherever you are in the world, if you're in Hong Kong, you may be lucky enough to be able to go out, but if you're somewhere else, things might get a little bit difficult. So I am not a divorce lawyer, and as I always say, if you hear people thinking about getting a divorce lawyer, maybe you should send them to me first, because I've saved them, a lot of my clients, a lot of money by not getting as far as the divorce lawyer. Anyway, so this is just a joke, but what I really want to talk to you about today is how do we manage conflict? What is actually happening in our mind, in our brain, where we're having a conflict? Because we don't necessarily understand the process. And when people are literally sitting on top of us in a small apartment, as we know in Hong Kong, where we're constantly faced with their annoying habits, with the things they say or they do, with the noise that we have from the kids, literally I'm sure you have noticed that our fuse is getting shorter and shorter, and we are not able to manage those emotions very easily. So brain during conflict. If you watch my last week's presentation, you might know a few of these things, but I'm only going to go through it just for a little bit. So the reason we are responding very fast to any triggers, or when our buttons are being pushed by our partner, and we know that our family and partners can have this kind of big red button in front of them that they keep pushing when they want to annoy us. The part of our brain that is responsible for this response is called the amygdala, and we actually have two amygdalas. They're two tiny little glands somewhere in the side of our brain, as you can see in the picture. And this is a little bit like a sprinkler system, like an alarm system that our brain has on all the time, which is responsible for our survival. So anytime that we feel threatened in any way, the amygdala regulates our fight or flight instinct, which means it gives us the power to either fight whatever threat we're seeing. And that in these days, with so much stress, translates by being snappy or being short-tempered or making comments or being judgmental and critical. Or we choose to retreat from that fight, to go away and to ignore everybody and to escape in our own little world. Either one of those is not actually functioning at the base level where we can think normally and respond normally. The second thing about the amygdala is that it responds without thought. So we don't actually sit there and interpret whether the threat is real or not. It's just sometimes people say things that remind us of other stuff from the past, or when they said it the last time and we interpreted and we had a big fight. So it doesn't feel like we are in control of ourselves when the amygdala is triggered, because it's not something that we can control consciously. So then we react like crazy. We respond to that threat as if someone was literally trying to kill us. And I know from a lot of conversations that I'm having with my clients, they often say, oh, like last time my husband said something, I reacted a little bit too strongly. I maybe had a glass of wine and I wasn't really able to control my emotions. So what I want to do today in this training is to give you some tools of how you can control this instinctive reaction in a conflict, so that less fights are happening and that button gets smaller and smaller, so that we're not so triggered all the time. Okay. So the second part is that obviously we all have triggers. Those triggers come from previous experiences. They come from baggage, so to speak, things that we have accumulated with that particular person in the past, which is why the proximity of someone that knows us so well and knows where to push to get us into this state of reaction is actually quite tricky, quite difficult to handle. So anyway, at the moment, I'm going to move on to the next slide, which talks about the smart part. So I said earlier that we cannot control the amygdala, and that's perfectly normal because it's an instinctive response of our body and our brain. But the prefrontal cortex is a part of our brain which functions as an analyst of the situation, which gets engaged a little bit later. It's part of the conscious mind and is able to analyze whether the threat is real or not. Whether if our partner says, oh, why do you have to do it this way? They don't necessarily mean it as a criticism. Maybe they're actually curious about why are you choosing this option versus another one that they might feel is maybe more appropriate as a response. But the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that is the more evolved structure that helps us be more social. So when we are in the company of others, the more we use this part of our brain to respond to them, the easier it is for us to have productive, powerful connections and not to get very into this kind of animalistic reactive space. The thing though with the prefrontal cortex is that is not instinctively turned on like the amygdala is. The amygdala gets on in nanoseconds. The prefrontal cortex, it's such a difficult word to say, needs a little bit longer to respond, and it actually takes almost like a deep breath. The space that you need to take a deep breath is the space that the mind has analyzed the threat and is able to say, hang on a minute, it's actually not as bad. Nobody's really killing you. This part actually gives you conscious control. So being able to see this is really important because you can see how you have a choice on how you respond. You have a choice on how you get back to whatever the person is saying. Last week, I shared a whole training on the communication map, so I'm not going to repeat it here, but essentially what was powerful in the communication map, if you want to watch this, it is in my Facebook group or it's on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. At the end of this training, you can ask for a link and I will share this with you. So ultimately, the communication map is really a 5-step system that allows you to navigate any kind of conflict that you're having. And today, I want to add a little bit to that map that I've shared. One of the easiest ways that I help my clients who are having an argument determine whether it's a real threat or not is to help them use this paradigm that I called facts, judgments, feelings. So the way we interpret reality is that it all starts with a thought in our head. That thought could be, oh, you know, it's late, it's getting late. You're looking at the watch and you're thinking it's getting late. Now, that in itself is already a judgment because you already compared it to something that would be early. But if you say it's 6:10 in the evening, that's a fact. It doesn't have to mean anything. It's simply the time in Hong Kong right now. But then we make a judgment on it, right? So when I say, oh my God, it's already so late in the day and I haven't done anything, it means that I've already made a judgment on that fact. And that judgment actually creates a feeling in myself. It makes me maybe anxious that I haven't gotten everything done. Maybe it makes me feel under pressure because I have something happening later. Maybe I haven't cooked dinner for my family. So that triggers an emotion in myself. But it's not the fact that has created that in my environment, but it's only the judgment. So what I really mean here is that when we have a conflict, very often in fact, most of the time, conflicts are not about facts. Conflicts are always about judgments. You know, let's imagine that your husband is late for dinner and he hasn't called you to tell you that he's going to be late. The fact is, instead of coming home at 6, he comes home at 8. Now, you can make a lot of judgments about that. You can think, oh, he's such a jerk. He's this inconsiderate. He doesn't care about me. He he's so disorganized. He can't get out of the office on time, blah, 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 blah. And I'm so busy with the kids and I have to cook and that's so horrible and poor me. So all of this story that we're creating in our head is actually the judgment. And because of that judgment, we get angry, we get upset, we get emotional, we get pissed off, we get triggered. And when he comes through the door, then we're already in argument mode. So it's going to be really difficult for us to stay calm and to focus on the facts and maybe listen to why he was late. You know, he could have been stopped by the police, which wouldn't be great. And this happens very often when we are sitting on top of each other at home these days, right? There are all sorts of things that are happening around us. You know, the kids are being a little bit noisy. Someone could be in a phone call, in a conference call, and something else happens. And that is a fact. But then the judgment that we're making can actually make things worse. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of what I think is the secret to having positive, simple communication with our partner, which is really a shift in the way we express ourselves. So on top of having the whole, you know, as I talked a little bit earlier about the paradigm, the other thing that I want to share now is how our perception really changes this thing. So I already gave the example of the husband being late, but what if we imagine that both you and your husband are waking up in the morning and you pull the curtains open, just like this picture shows, and it's a sunny day, but you actually are stuck at home. So you have to do all this work with the kids, homeschooling, blah, blah, blah. There's very little that you can do to enjoy the sunshine because you know you already have a business that you have to run. You have meetings and calls you have to make. The kids are at home. You're going to have to check their homework. Essentially, you have no time for yourself. And you're looking outside and the judgment that you're making is like, oh shit, you know, I really wish it wasn't so sunny today because I'm going to feel like I'm trapped inside the house. And because you're making this judgment that you are trapped in the house and you won't be able to enjoy the sunshine, that already will make you feel bad about today. Maybe your husband is in a very different space. Maybe he wakes up in the morning and whereas normally he would have to go to work and do whatever he needs to do to bring home the bacon or the vegetarian meal, whatever it is. Maybe he wakes up and he knows he doesn't have to go to the office, which means that maybe he can go for a jog, maybe he can go and work from the park, or maybe he has a meeting outside of the office, which he can do, which otherwise would not have been possible. So for him, he's going, wow, how nice that it's actually sunny today, so I can go out and enjoy a little bit of this sunshine because I haven't gotten any vitamin D for ages. So the judgment that he is making out of this experience, the fact is the same. The sun is shining outside, but the judgment that he makes is actually that thank God it's sunny because I wanted to go and have this experience outside. So these two points of view can create a massive argument because while you are already in a bad mood because you've already imagined how the day is going to be shit, and he's in a really good mood because he's thinking, oh, I can't wait to go and do my jog outside or to meet my personal trainer in the park, there's going to be a clash in that moment. There's going to be a clash of perspectives. Like you are on almost like on two different planets. So how do we reconcile these things? What actually happens when we are on two different planets where we respond differently? And the key barriers that we have to communication tend to look a little bit like this. So sometimes we complain. We go, oh, how could you possibly be so silly as to book a personal training session today when you know we have so much work to do? The other thing that we do is we're being very demanding when we're upset. You know, if I'm feeling annoyed that the husband is going to go for a jog or a boxing session and I actually have all the work to do, I might say, actually, no, you can't go. You really need to be the one that takes the kids to the doctor, for example. So that's when we make a demand and we don't actually we tell them what to do, which most husbands don't like, right? The third thing is we actually threaten them to say, you know what, today I'm not going to do anything, and the kids can just sit here and do whatever they want by themselves. And I don't care if they pass the exams or not. And I don't care if you're going to die of starvation because I'm not cooking either. So also, how is he going to respond to that? His amygdala will be triggered straight away, and he's going to say, well, but you always put this on me and whatever. Coercion means we're trying to force people to do what we want. You can say, no, you must take the kids to school because I simply have no problem, which again is not going to be seen very positively by our partner. We also tend to criticize a lot. We would say something like, oh, wow, you never pay any attention to what's happening around you. You're always focused on your work. You never give a shit about what's happening in my world, and you're such a jerk. Lovely. He's going to respond very, very nicely to that. Entitlement is when we think we deserve certain things, you know, oh, you should be doing more around the house. And yes, he should be doing more around the house, but not because you tell him so, but because you have agreements on the different roles that you have. And the last one is the famous, oh, I know what you're going to think. I know exactly what's going on in your mind. Well, actually, you don't. You're mind reading. You're imagining that you know what is happening in this other universe based on, you know, whatever your experience is. So maybe he is very, very happy and in a mood to help you, but you're already thinking that he's going to reject you. So you're already reacting to that. So all of these responses are obviously going to trigger a negative response from the amygdala of the other person. And what that means is that they're going to interpret all these words as a threat. So they're going to get into a certain type of behavior. So the impact of blaming and complaining. So if we frame the conversation, let's say you have a complaint, you have something that is legitimate that is happening in your life that you're not happy with. Maybe one of your needs is not met, or one of your standards isn't met. Okay, well, there are different ways of communicating that. Just a couple of hours ago, I had a session with a client who was talking to me about how she's looking to improve her communication skills so that her husband doesn't think she's so much trouble, the way she put it. So when we communicate constantly through criticizing, through blaming and complaining, there's a few things that are happening on the other side beyond the behaviors that I've mentioned. So one of the main responses that we have when someone is attacking us, so to speak, so when someone is criticizing or judging or mind reading or doing any of those things that I spoke about on the previous slide, we get defensive. You know, if I always say to you, oh, how come you never do this? This is actually a complaint. How come you never come home on time to dinner? Why do I always have to keep reminding you that we're eating at 6? How is it so complicated for you to remember that this is the time that we need to feed the kids, for example? So when I communicate it like this, not only are the words that I'm saying an attack to yourself because I'm judging you, I'm criticizing you, I'm complaining about your behavior, all in one, everything is in there. So that's going to make the other side of this argument defensive. Like, what, me? You know I have to work late. You know my boss is such an asshole, and you know I don't have any choice at what time I go to work or I leave work. So that's the other partner getting into, okay, I need to protect myself. You're trying to attack me. I'm getting defensive. So it tends to happen through switching blame to say, oh, you should know this about me, which is the other entitlement that we have. So it's kind of becoming like a game of tennis where we throw the ball to each other, and the threats and the complaints and the blame is kind of being passed over the net all the time. The second part, as I mentioned, is we tend to be judgmental about our partner. We tend to say, oh, but how can you be so inconsiderate to understand that, you know, my job is under threat at the moment, that I have to work late because otherwise I'm going to get fired. And how could I possibly come home at 6 every single time? You're just making this plan and it's your idea of how to do this, and I didn't agree to it. So there's a lot of judgment in this statement. Then we have interpretation, which means we make up a story around what's happening. And that interpretation could be like, oh, well, you know, you always make things up about how it's my fault that I do all of this, but you never see what's going on your side. And you always think that I'm going for drinks with my friends or whatever. So that's when actually that isn't true, but we create a story about what is happening for you, even though we don't really know what is really happening. And then, of course, we have reactivity, reactive emotion, when, I don't know, maybe you get so angry with your partner that you throw something, a drink in his face or something, or you start crying, or you start yelling, or, you start punishing your children. So all of these behaviors are obviously not great for communicating positively and for engaging with your partner so that you create connection and intimacy. So the tool that I want to introduce to you today is called iMessage Feedback. I use it a lot in my coaching and if you've had any training in the corporate world or something like that, you would know that this is the positive way of communicating how you're feeling. And the difference is, in all of the previous statements or all the examples that I've given until now, most of the statements were starting with, you never do this, you always do that, how come you never do this? So the focus in all that communication is you, it's your fault, your problem, I have no responsibility, and you are making me feel a certain way. The reality is nobody's making us feel anything. What is making us feel something is the judgment that we put on a thought. So the iMessage feedback is really starting the communication with the objective of communicating how we feel. So the partner's response is not something that we have control over, but what we have control over is how we feel, how we think, and therefore the feeling that that thought generates, and the judgment, the filter that we put on that thought that generates this feeling. So an I statement would be something like, I feel very disappointed when you don't come home on time for dinner, because I always enjoy the atmosphere of with all of us sitting around a table, and the kids really getting this feeling that we are a united family and everybody is present in these moments of connection. And what I would really appreciate from you, what I really need, is that at least we can make an agreement on how many times can we have this moment, because it's really good for our children to have this experience. So I will share this in my Facebook group after the recording is finished. And if you want to print this particular page and give it a go next time you are having some sort of conversation with your partner, try your very best to avoid using the word you in any way. So if you focus entirely on your experience, there's a couple of things that I would invite you to consider. So as you are the sender, as you are the person who is communicating something that is happening for you, I'd like you to focus your attention next time you try on, how do you feel when you express this message in this way? How does it feel when you're fully communicating to your partner exactly what's going on for you? Because a lot of the times when we're blaming and complaining, we're not really communicating. We're just venting. We're just letting all of those emotions express themselves in whatever way. But this gives you control. This gives you power. By communicating exactly what is happening for you, you're taking control of the situation, and you know that the only thing that you can truly control is how you feel. So I'd like you to focus on, how does it make you feel when you're sharing from the heart with your partner, with the feeling that you're having, the situation when that feeling comes up for you, what is the impact, or like the reason why you're feeling that way, what is the background to the story, if you like, or the reason you're interpreting it that way, and then making a direct request as to how that could be resolved. How can your partner contribute to you feeling different? The second thing that I'd like you to pay attention to is, what is the impact of this type of communication on the receiver? So you probably know already how they react if you're blaming them or complaining to them, because you've already had that experience potentially many, many times before. So you know they're going to get angry. You already know. Many people tell me this, oh, I don't want to say this to my husband because I know exactly what he's going to say. He's going to say, well, if you don't like this, we can divorce. That's mind reading. And it's also living in the past. But if you try this, try it for something simple. Something really basic, something that is not a big trigger, not a big button. And then just see, when you're communicating it like this, when you're focusing on your own experience and you say, I feel really sad when you are not here to play with the children as much as I am, because I believe that they could learn so much from you. And what would be really helpful is if you could allocate more time. I know that you need time off and you need time for yourself, but it would be great if you could find ways of entertaining the children or playing with the children when that happens. So you will see that the impact that your words, these words, have on the receiver will be completely different. It will not be creating defensiveness, judgment, criticism, reactive emotions. None of those things will happen. Your partner is going to listen in a very different way. They're probably going to be shocked that you are communicating so nicely. So as you are watching what's happening for them, also make a note to see how that whole energy of anger and conflict and disconnection will change if you do this constantly. If you make an effort to engage your prefrontal cortex and communicate from the heart, authentically, directly, without all that stuff. Take a deep breath before you're communicating to give the smart part of your brain to engage and to connect with all those social skills that you have. And then notice how that changes your relationship, because the basis, the foundation of connection and intimacy is to feel heard. But when you are blaming and complaining, the other person is really not in the mood to hear you. So they go back into the past and they bring those experiences forward, and they're like this, blah, 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 blah. They're not paying attention to what you're doing. So if you are the sender, make the notes of this. And if you are the listener, so you could easily teach this little technique to your husband, your children, your parents. Just say, let's try this little game. From now on, we only speak like this. We only communicate our desire in these 4 steps. 1, I feel. When? Because. How? What do I need from you? It's actually quite a simple structure. And if you practice it on a regular basis, it will be quite simple. It will become second nature. Now, if they play it back to you, if you play this game with them and they do communicate in the same way, I'd like you to focus on how do you feel when you receive this message versus a situation in the past that I'm sure you can recall very easily, where you were triggered, where you got defensive, or you got angry, where you started criticizing, or you felt judged. So you will notice the impact that it has on you, how the energy of that message will not trigger that primitive, the nasty part of your brain, but it will make you want to collaborate. It will make you want to find a solution that is win-win with your partner. And then pay attention to what is different, what seems different about your experience. What do you really want to say to someone when they're communicating authentically from their heart? What is exactly happening with them versus when someone attacks you? There will be a significant difference, I promise you, on an energetic and emotional level. And paying attention to this will encourage you to continue to use this tool with everybody basically in your life. And notice that the answer that you want to give when someone presents a problem that way will be much more collaborative, will be much more compassionate. You will discover empathy. You will discover that actually we don't want to hurt our partner. We don't want to hurt our children or our parents when they're expressing a negative emotion. We want to support them in releasing that. And we want them to play the game with us so that we are both working together towards a win-win solution, as opposed to having what I call a lose-lose solution, which most people call compromise. I don't believe in compromise. So I encourage you to try to find this win-win solution and see how it goes. And if anybody who's on the call has any questions, I'm here to take a couple. If not, I will post a video in my Facebook group and I will answer more questions there. So if anybody has questions, show up, raise your hand, put your camera and mic on and let me know. If not, thank you so much for being here today and for listening to this. I hope it's been helpful for you. I'm trying to keep these trainings relatively short and not very complicated because I don't want you to feel like there's too much information being shared. But if you, or anytime you feel like there's anything I can help you to understand, to explore, to explain, just get in touch with me either through the comments in the video on YouTube or on my Facebook page, or even at my website, which is happyeverafter.asia. I'm sure you know how to find me. So thank you so much. Have a beautiful evening and a lovely weekend, and see you next Friday for the next training. Take care.